masters of the universe. Skeletor's Ice Attack. It was a bright, sunny day in the port of Randerhaven. Flags waved in the sea breeze, and crowds lined the quayside to cheer as King Randor and Queen Marlena prepared to embark in the royal ship Sea Eagle. Their son, Prince Adam, was with them, and also his childhood friend, Tila. The royal family stepped into the royal hover barge and were swiftly ferried across the harbor. With a beating of drums and fanfares of trumpets, they went aboard Sea Eagle. The king and queen and even Tila greeted the captain with proper dignity. But King Randor frowned at Prince Adam, who was too excited at the thought of the summer holiday in the Golden Isle. He laughed and shouted and waved to the sailors and the crowd on shore, who waved and shouted back. No one suspected that the happy-go-lucky prince was also He-Man, mightiest man in the universe. The decks of the Sea Eagle bustled with activity as the crew prepared for sea. Baggage was taken below. The passengers were shown to their cabins. The royal hover barge returned to shore. No one noticed a sinister shape lurking in the shadows close to the hull of Sea Eagle. It was part human, but covered in scales. One of the sea people, a servant of Merman, lord of the sea. His head above water, the evil creature strained his ears as the crew spoke amongst themselves.
Looks like being a good voyage.
Yes, I always enjoy the trip to the Golden Isles.
I hope the weather stays calm for His Majesty and family.
Right. Now let's get this gear stowed. We sail with the tide.
Even before Sea Eagle had weighed anchor, or before the officers on the bridge had set the electronic sail controls, the spy was already speeding underwater towards the caverns of the Sea People. Far below the surface, Merman sat in the dim green light of his underwater lair. He wanted power, but to gain power, he needed to find favor with his master, Skeletor, Lord of Destruction. Suddenly, there was a commotion outside. 2 guards came in, escorting a panting sea creature. He threw himself at Merman's feet.
Master,
He gasped.
your enemies have set sail in a ship. Their course is towards the Golden Isles.
Merman jumped to his feet.
Alone on the sea. They are at my mercy. This must be reported to my lord Skeletor immediately.
Within seconds, word came back from the Lord of Destruction.
Capture the royal family of Etenia and hold them to ransom. And this time, don't bungle it in your usual way.
Quickly, Merman issued his orders. Then, on a giant monitor screen, he watched as the Sea Eagle sped across the surface of the sea, the hull just above the waves. Merman pointed to a chart carved on the rock wall of the cavern.
By nightfall, the ship will have reached this point. That is where I shall set my trap.
Through the slimy caverns and passages of the undersea world, the Sea People hurried to the assembly point. Each was armed with a zero-energy projector. At a command from Merman, the outer gates of his fortress were thrown open. In a shimmering column of scaly bodies, his people glided swiftly through the green depths to intercept Sea Eagle and her royal passengers. The sun had set below the horizon when Merman halted his people. Rising carefully just above the water, he scanned the surface of the sea. In the last of the light, he could just make out the gleam of sails as the royal ship sailed straight into Merman's trap. On board, King Randor and Prince Adam had joined the captain on the bridge. All was quiet. Lights flickered on the navigation panel. The wheel was on automatic pilot. Only occasionally an officer adjusted the sail controls as the wind changed slightly. The king and his son went to their cabins, and the great ship flew across the waves and into the gathering darkness. Merman took one last look. Then he gave the command. The Sea People spread out into a wide circle, and as the Sea Eagle reached the center, they aimed their weapons and fired. As the zero energy was released, the sea began to freeze. A thin film of ice formed around the ship. It grew thicker. It formed into hummocks and pinnacles. Soon, the Sea Eagle was trapped in the middle of a giant ice floe. Merman dismissed his people, then waited to decide his next move. On the bridge of Sea Eagle, the instrument showed the speed of the ship rapidly dropping. The captain ordered powerful searchlights to be switched on. At first, there was nothing to see. Then one of the sailors cried out,
Captain, look at the sea! There's something happening to it!
The waves had stopped moving.
The sea is freezing.
Cried the captain.
We must break out. Set more sail.
But even as the controls were adjusted, the ice was growing thicker and piling up around the ship. Sea Eagle was trapped and helpless. The passengers and crew dressed in cold weather gear and examined the ice from the deck.
We must try to blast our way out,
said the captain. The ship's weapons were trained on the ice, but even after several minutes firing, they had no effect. When dawn came, the ship was held as firmly as before. In his cabin, Prince Adam was thinking about the situation.
This is the work of Skeletor, or one of his evil band,
he said to himself.
It is time for the masters of the universe to take a hand.
He pulled the sword of power from its hiding place among his clothes in a chest. Unsheathing the sword, he cried,
By the power of Grayskull!
And was instantly transformed into He-Man. Using the power of the blade, he sent out a powerful telesummons to man-at-arms back at Castle Grayskull to join him secretly in Talon Fighter. Then he made his way stealthily to the ship's chart room. There, after a quick search, he found the chart he was looking for. Then he hurried back to his cabin to study it and complete his plans. With the chart spread on the cabin table, He-Man worked out the position of Sea Eagle. Then, he thought,
While the ship is trapped in the ice, we may be attacked at any time. There is only one way to melt an ice floe of this size. We must try to harness the power of Inferno Island. It is a long way off, but it is our only chance.
Rolling up the chart and tucking it into his belt, He-Man slipped out of the cabin and up on deck. It was deserted as the passengers and crew stayed below decks out of the bitter cold from the ice. Taking a coil of rope, He-Man tied it to the ship's rail and climbed down it. The ice was piled in a great jumbled mass. After a few steps, He-Man was out of sight of the ship, but he hurried on until he came to the water's edge where the floe was flat and smooth. Even as he did so, the sword of power began to pulsate with light as it picked up a homing signal from Talon Fighter. Hidden among the ice hummocks, He-Man watched for the first sign of Talon Fighter. From far off, he made out the roar of the craft's jets. Then the sound stopped as Man-at-Arms cut the power and swooped down in a fast, silent glide close above the waves and hidden from the Sea Eagle by the ice. One quick burst of reverse thrust, and the sleek craft was down and sliding to a halt close to He-Man. Man-at-Arms stepped out of the cockpit and grasped He-Man by the hand.
I think that this mischief is the work of that green troublemaker, Merman. I saw a lot of activity below the waves as I flew over.
He-Man showed Man-at-Arms the chart.
I don't know exactly what Merman is likely to be plotting,
he said.
But we have not a moment to lose.
With He-Man at the controls, Talon Fighter lifted from the ice and, in a moment, was a shining speck against the sky. With its controls locked onto the course already worked out by He-Man from the borrowed chart, Talon Fighter flashed through the sky. Soon the ice floe and the imprisoned Sea Eagle were left far behind. He-Man strained his eyes, scanning the horizon. Then he cried out,
There it is, dead ahead, Inferno Island.
Soon they could make out clearly the smoking top of the island. The smoke rose in a column higher even than Talon Fighter, and He-Man took over the controls and made a wide circle to avoid it. Then he put Talon Fighter into a steep dive that brought them close to the crater of the volcano. The craft bounced and buffeted in the hot air currents rising from the fiery island. It took all of He-Man's mighty strength to hold a steady course round the rim of the crater where molten lava bubbled and fumed close to overflowing. He-Man circled the volcano once more. Then he swung Talon Fighter into position for a long, fast dive towards the crater's rim. Jets screaming at full power, Talon Fighter hurtled downwards. Then He-Man pressed the firing controls on the laser cannons. White-hot streaks of energy leapt from the muzzles and fragments of rock flew into the air. The rim of the crater crumbled and collapsed. As He-Man pulled his craft up and away in a tight turn, the whole side of the volcano collapsed. Molten lava rolled in a burning river across the island. When it reached the sea, the water boiled with great clouds of steam. Swiftly, the boiling water moved out from the island. The current of the steaming water was already traveling in the direction of Sea Eagle. Once there, it would melt the ice and the ship would be free. Racing ahead of the current, Talon Fighter drew close to the ice floe. As Man-at-Arms had done, He-Man came in low, and through the clear water he saw the Sea People massing for the attack. The warm current was going to arrive too late. He-Man brought Talon Fighter in to hover just above the ice. Then he jumped out, while Man-at-Arms again took to the air. His job was to keep watch on the activities of the Sea People. Boarding the ship in the same way as he had left it, He-Man hurried to find Teela and explained what he and Man-at-Arms had been doing. As the warrior goddess, her powers were almost equal to his own, and he wanted her help.
The warm sea current is moving too slowly,
He explained.
We must go to meet it. While Merman has at his command great numbers of the creatures of the sea, there are many of whom he is not master. The warm-blooded sea dwellers count him as their enemy. Perhaps they will come to our aid. Will you try?
Yes.
Replied Teela.
If I can reach enough of them by thought energy, they will do as I ask.
Following He-Man, Teela climbed down onto the ice. They looked for a high place and found an ice pinnacle. He-Man helped Teela to stand on top of it. Then she raised her cobra scepter above her head. As her thought energy flowed into it, the eyes began to pulse with power. Soon the eyes of the scepter glowed steadily and brightly. Teela closed her eyes and began to transmit a silent message by the power of her mind.
I, Teela, warrior goddess, summon you who have warm blood by command of the Lord He-Man.
He-Man scanned the waves, but nothing moved. Again, Teela sent out her message. And again. Then, far off, there appeared a puff of vapor above the waves. Then another, and another. A school of whales was approaching. A herd of walruses suddenly surfaced close to the ice. Dolphins came leaping over the crests of the waves, and a school of porpoises followed quickly. More and more whales, walruses, dolphins, porpoises, and a huge herd of seals joined them. In her mind, Teela heard their thoughts.
Command us, Teela. We are here to do your bidding.
He-Man looked at the sea animals as they jostled beside the ice floe.
Now,
He said to Teela.
command them to push against the ice.
Again, Teela raised the cobra scepter, and again the eyes glowed as she sent out more mind energy.
Use your strength. Push against the ice.
With a great threshing of tails, fins, and flippers, the whales, walruses, dolphins, porpoises, and seals pushed hard. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the great ice floe began to move. It gathered speed, heading steadily for the warm current flowing from Inferno Island. Again, He-Man scanned the surface of the sea for any sign of Merman. but the sea people were keeping out of sight because Man-at-Arms was circling above. There was nothing more that He-Man and Teela could do for the moment. He-Man said,
You go back to the ship. I will get Man-at-Arms to pick me up.
He waited until she had gone, then changed into Prince Adam once more and made his way, unseen, back to the ship as well. Far away in his lair in Snake Mountain, Skeletor, Lord of Destruction, was uneasy. He decided to spy on his underlings and activated his spy scan monitor. All seemed well. Then he tuned in to Merman. At first, it looked as though Merman was winning the day. On the screen, Sea Eagle appeared trapped in the ice. Below the surface of the sea was Merman, surrounded by his warriors. But when Skeletor looked again, he saw that the ice floe in which Sea Eagle was trapped was itself moving, away from the undersea army. Skeletor screamed with rage, and his slaves fled in terror.
That fool!
He roared,
His bungling will bring disaster to us all!
Shouting an order to his scurrying slaves, he raced out to his fast and deadly hovercraft. His Roton was ready for him, prepared for takeoff. Scattering the ground crew before him, Skeletor leapt aboard, and a moment later was flashing across the coast and out to sea. From a distance, Skeletor spotted the trapped Sea Eagle. As he got closer, he saw the great mass of creatures pushing the ice floe. Desperate to know what was happening, Skeletor called up Merman. Merman's face appeared on the cockpit video screen.
You spineless jellyfish!
Skeletor shrieked.
This is some trick of the masters of the universe! Do something about it!
I'll order my warriors.
Stammered Merman.
Warriors! Witless sea urchins!
Cried Skeletor.
Summon the sharks, stingrays, sea serpents to attack those interfering air breathers!
Merman did as he was ordered, climbing onto the ice to direct operations. Skeletor watched with satisfaction as a swarm of sharks, stingrays, and sea serpents raced to the attack. Then he guided the Roton in to alight on the ice. He still had to deal with Merman. As the Roton skidded to a standstill, Skeletor leapt out and climbed onto an ice hummock. He saw Merman standing on another hummock. And he also saw the sharks, stingrays, and sea serpents fleeing for their lives. A school of highly intelligent killer whales had been patrolling at the rear of Teela's creatures as they pushed the ice floe. Now they rushed to the attack, teeth gleaming, quickly joined by the long-tusked walruses. Merman shouted after them in rage.
Cowards, come back!
And he fired shots from his energy weapon into the waves, but could not stop the retreat. Beside himself with rage, Skeletor aimed a shot at Merman, but it went wide as his foot slipped. The ice was melting. The floe was breaking up. Merman fired blasts of ice pellets, and so the two evil creatures battled it out on the wet, slippery ice, ducking and dodging among the crumbling hummocks. At the sound of battle, the passengers and crew of Sea Eagle rushed on deck. Already they could feel the air becoming milder as the ice melted. They saw Merman fire once again at Skeletor. Merman slipped on the ice. He sprawled full length and his weapon flew from his hand. It slid along the ice and over the edge. Weaponless, Merman decided to follow. In a hail of shots from Skeletor, he dived into the water and disappeared. Alone on the ice, Skeletor made to escape in the Roton. But he had left it too late. The ice floe was already breaking into fragments. A wide lane of water separated him from his machine, which drifted farther off, even as he watched. The ice under Skeletor's feet gave a lurch. The piece upon which he was standing had broken free of the main floe and was drifting off, carrying him with it. Standing by the ship's rail, Prince Adam and Teela watched Skeletor's plight.
I feel almost sorry for him,
said Teela. Skeletor clung in terror to the rapidly shrinking piece of ice.
Merman!
He screamed.
I command you to come to my aid! I am your lord and master!
There was a swirl in the water, but it was not Merman. One of the killer whales was in a playful mood. It swam close, then it dived under Skeletor, making the ice rock violently. Again, Skeletor shouted for Merman. Adam turned to Tila.
Merman is not the bravest of creatures,
He said,
Skeletor is going to be very cold and wet before Merman plucks up courage to face him, let alone rescue him.
The last piece of ice drifted clear of Sea Eagle. The captain shouted an order, and the sails filled to the freshening breeze. The great ship gathered way faster and faster until the wind sang in the rigging and she scarcely seemed to touch even the tops of the waves. The passengers looked astern. Already far behind, the last pieces of ice bobbed on the waves. On one, the Roton could be seen, and on another, the tiny figure of Skeletor waved and shouted for Merman. But Adam, with Tila by his side, was looking at the sky, and in the distance he could see a silvery streak against the blue. It was the Talon fighter returning to Castle Grayskull with man-at-arms. The masters of the universe had triumphed once again.